Up next, we have the Cayuga tribe. They were known as the people of the Great Swamp. They were peaceful people known for their orchards. They lived between the Seneca and the Onondaga tribes, so they were protected in two directions. They are now federally recognized in Canada. And if you notice, their symbol, unlike everybody else's, is actually in the form of a shield instead of a circle that many of the other ones are. This tribe is made up of 5 clans, each of which had a den mother. They are largely focused on the spirituality of animals, greater even than their sister nations. The clan names are Bear, Heron, Snipe, Turtle, and Wolf. The Den Mother is responsible for making sure all of the members of the tribe are in a healthy space spiritually. During the Revolutionary War, they decided to stay neutral, but they were constantly pillaged, killed, and their things burned by the American soldiers. Finally, they were forced to flee for their lives. Their land was given to the American soldiers. They fled to other tribes of the Iroquois Confederacy, or Canada, where they worked for British in exchange for their safety. In 1794, they signed their land over to the U.S. government, something they had no choice but to do, as their allies lost in the war. Choosing to side with the British, who eventually lost, meant they either had to give up their land peacefully or be forced off with no holding back in the consequences that could follow. For over 200 years, they had hoped to be given their land back, but the state of New York ignored every claim they had to it. Finally, they decided to get it back piece by piece through purchase. There was a large legal battle over the land that lasted well over 30 years. Deciding who had the right to the land and how the differences should be settled took many, many different people and many, many different types of court. Eventually, it was decided that the nation had waited too long for the claim to be made to the land, and they would have to buy it back just like any other people wanting to use this land, which was truly heartbreaking for them. Today, there are 3 different bands of the Cayuga Nation, 2 larger bands that live on reservations in Ontario, and a larger one that resides in New York with no reservation. They hope to acquire back much of the land that was stripped from them, and over the years they've been able to start buying it back. There are over 12,000 members of the Cayuga Nation who currently reside in Ontario, Oklahoma, and New York. Next, we have the Oneida people. This is their symbol. As you can see, it's a tree with a chain, and that's shaded in. They were the first ally of the American cause and were gifted 300,000 acres as a thank you. They started out with 6 million acres in the original territory, but were forced out of much of that during war periods. So the 300,000 acres in comparison to the 6 million didn't really even compare. When New York became a state, they lost over 5 million acres in one fatal swoop. Although they were active and influential supporters of the Americans in the Revolutionary War, their homeland was still not a priority, instead being used for the future of the nation. They moved to Wisconsin, a completely different environment for them, and adapted to that, and bought over 5 million acres from other tribes to live on there. The relationship between this tribe and the U.S. government has always been easier than those of other nations, because they were willing to help the Americans in their fight. Even though the government did take their land, they did it with much less force and threat than faced many of the other nations. In the 1900s, the federal treaties began to have a very negative effect on all the nations, and the Oneida included. They had to divide and disperse in order to survive. They did not have a good place to call home, and many of their families were forced to leave the culture and tribe and join the American society in order to provide for their families. They've always been a self-governed nation that now has thriving schools, houses, and employment opportunities. This is something they are very proud of and work to uphold. Today, they have over 18,000 acres, a far larger number than what they've had in the past. There are over 16,000 members, and they are a large employer for both members of the tribe and for people outside of their culture, which is something that is really interesting about this tribe. Finally, we have the Seneca tribe. As you can see, their symbol is a lot of animals in different city-states that they've lived in. Obviously, I'm not the best at drawing animals, but I think you can kind of tell these were all the things that they relied on and different predators and different things that they hunted. They have a 3-branch government system, much like the U.S. government. All of their officials are elected and kept in position for a short term. They also live in longhouses along a river and are kept their villages safe with picket fences that they put around them. They are the farthest west of all the tribes, and they originally started with 2 bands, the Western and the Eastern. There are 3 federally recognized Seneca bands. 2 are in the United States and 1 is in Canada. They were known for their hunting, gathering, fishing, and for their how they grew squash. They had a fascination with the stars and all the things in the skies, like many of the tribes, but this one's focused a little more specifically on it. They told many stories about what was up there, things that eventually faded into lore and became part of their verbally passed down culture. They presently have over 8,000 tribal members and are one of the leaders in maintaining the cultural history of the tribes. They do an excellent job and work hard to preserve their museums, rituals, songs, and other artifacts that teach about the native lifestyle. They're really the leaders in making sure that the natives are remembered, respected, and preserved in a way that tells the true truth of their history and not in the way that others like to describe it. And they're really good at making sure that their artifacts are preserved without being tossed aside as something insignificant. That was in that conclusion. That's the 5 Iroquois tribes that I'd like to talk about. In response to the questions, I think this essay meets the goal of the course because I learned a lot as I did this. I know it's not beautiful, but I'm really proud of this and proud of all the things that I learned. I think I really enjoyed this, and I will definitely keep this. I enjoyed doing this project more than I thought I would, and I enjoyed making this interesting looking piece. I know it doesn't look professional, it doesn't look as great as other people, but I learned a lot about what goes into these things and how other people try to keep these things respectful and the meaning behind everything. So I think this is something that I will appreciate for the future, and it really taught me a lot about the true meaning of these tribes and what they go through and how we should treat them and respect them. What did I learn about this topic that I selected? I mean, so much. I learned so much about each individual tribes and how, yes, they all came together to band together and, save each other in times that they needed and support each other, but also how they're so different individual within themselves. They all have a different culture, different religion, different things that they rely on, and different ways they dress and live, and it's just super important to understand that, yes, they all are Native Americans, but we also have to understand that there are different ways that they live, and we can't just gloss over that and assume that they're all the same. So we have to understand that we allow these people to celebrate their own culture, because just because they're part of the Native American culture doesn't mean that they aren't all a little bit different and all a little living different ways that we should absolutely respect. What features of my UnEssay should you pay special attention to as you evaluate it? I know it's ugly, but I really think this is cool. I mean, I did everything as a traditional way as I possibly could. I didn't go out and buy things. Anything that I had, I made these leather strips. The twine I had, but this is what they used. I was told in many, many videos. The stick that I think was really cool that I went and got something that was from a spiritual grounds. So I think that this is cool. I'm just really proud of this, and I know it doesn't look beautiful, but I'm really proud of everything that I learned and how I made this with a with respect in mind instead of just making something that looks beautiful. I made this to learn about them and to respect them, and I think that it was a really good experience for me. So I really appreciate this project, and I think that this is something that will always remind me to appreciate other cultures because there's so much more we can and should learn about them. Thank you.